Good evening, everybody. It's a great joy and honor to welcome you all to this public lecture, Troubled Times, Can We Be Surprised by Hope Again? This public lecture will be given by Archbishop Thabo Makgoba with reflections by Trineke Palm, Director, Scientific Institute of the ChristenUnie, and Christian Rebergen, Secretary General at the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. A special welcome to all of you who are joining us online from all around the world. Please be invited to be part of this community tonight. And a special welcome to you, Archbishop Thabo, to your wife Lungi. Lungi's always hiding. To Trineke Palm, to Christian Rebergen, and to Gregor Half. This occasion includes the launch of the book Voices of Hope. I will say a few more words later on, but I saw that Archbishop Thabo included it already in his lecture. My name is Jan Jorrit Hassenaar. Tonight I serve as your Master of Ceremonies, and I will guide you through the program. And just to warn you, as you hear, I'm very good in having thirst. And I'm very good at it because I'm doing it already since I was a little child. So I warn you, this might become a very long evening. Before we start, may I ask you to double check whether your cell phone is off, at least at silent mode. Then, now I want to invite Professor Gregor Half, Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences and Humanities at Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam, for the official opening. Gregor, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jan Jorrit. My dream as a layman has always been to at least once have a chance to stand as a lectern like this. So my dream has come true tonight. I have a few other dreams. I'll mention them later in the evening. I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to all of you, also on behalf of the Vrije Universiteit and the Vereniging. It really does make me very proud to be sharing an evening with you here on I'd say, questions that matter, debates that matter. And it makes me particularly grateful to do so, to have the opportunity to address those questions that matter with Archbishop Thabo, with Trineke Palm, and with Christian Rebergen. Thank you very much for joining us here tonight. As a layman and as an academic, I feel that a great academic space is one where minds meet for the first time and where things are said that otherwise would not have been said. And it's in this very special moment where we turn a sacred space into also being an academic space where that happens. And I just wanted to thank you once more for joining us in that experiment. And it's a great privilege that we've received from the English Reformed Church to try that out here. So on that note, thank you for making this space a meeting of minds, a space where we say things that otherwise would not have been said. And I wish you all a fantastic evening. Thank you very much for joining us.
Let me quickly share with you the flow of this evening. You will find it also on the program you have received by entering the church. First, we will have the public lecture by Archbishop Thabo. Then Giles will play the violin. Thereafter there will be reflections by Trineke Palm and by Christian Rebergen, not to close the conversation, but to broaden and open up the conversation. Keep your questions for the reception afterwards, because the final part of this event will be the handing over of the first copies of the Voices of Hope, and then we go together to the reception hall to develop the conversation further. So that's the flow of the program. And let me now go to Archbishop Thabo Makgoba, who will give the public lecture tonight, Troubled Times, Can We Be Surprised by Hope Again? Archbishop Thabo Makgoba is the Archbishop of Cape Town and the primate of the Anglican Church in Southern Africa. Archbishop Thabo is an internationally respected ecumenical leader and a public voice, widely known for his sustained commitment to social, educational, and environmental concerns. He is successor to Archbishop Desmond Tutu and Archbishop Jongokulu Dunjana. And these months he is having his sabbatical at Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam. Archbishop Thabo may invite you to come forward and to give us your lecture.
Thank you very much, John Jareth, for the welcome. Before I start, when Lungi and I arrived here, I did two ceremonies. One was to take my South African cell phone and to pack it in my bag and to buy a pay-as-you-go phone here and to archive all my South African contacts so that I am not contacted and the sabbatical is real. The second was to take my watch and to pack it in the suitcase that I'm going to take back home. So you might be here for a very long time. But on a much more serious note, thank you for the generous welcome to this church, to the university community, and to the city. What a privilege it is to be with you in this beautiful, history-laden space, and to those joining online from different parts of the world. You are not a distant audience. You are part of this gathering. This evening belongs to all of us. I've spotted a number of South Africans here at Molweni. I'm grateful to Professor John Jareth, Hassler of the School of Religion and Theology, his team and colleagues responsible for today and my family's sabbatical, to the Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences and Humanity, Professor Gregor Half, the faculty that is hosting us, and to the Rector of Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam, Professor Jeroen Geerts, and the VU Vereniging for their welcome and for the gift of a 3-month sabbatical at the university. I've never had that in my entire life, so thank you so much. To the rector of this parish, Reverend Marius Low and Professor Dion Foster, dank u ook, broers. Waar's Marius? Marius, thank you. I'm grateful to the editors of and contributors of the book, 30 Voices from Different Continents, Disciplines, Generations, and Religious Traditions, for trusting that hope is still worth speaking about. I want to say one more thing before I begin. Lungi and I have spent these last 6 weeks in Amsterdam meeting what I call different publics, communities, institutions, individuals who rarely appear in the same sentence, but who together make up the living texture of this city and its questions. So thank you, Chonjarit, for that. This sabbatical has been a gift of time and encounter, and much of what I want to say tonight has been sharpened by what I have seen and heard here. Amsterdam has been teaching me, and I'm still learning. Can we be surprised by hope again? I want to sit with that question before I try to answer it, because the word surprised matters. We are not asking tonight whether hope is theoretically possible. We are asking whether it can still arrive uninvited. Whether after everything the world has shown us, we still have the capacity to be ambushed by hope. In Sepedi, surprise means humagala. In other words, can we still be startled, frightened, astonished, seized, or overtaken by hope? In isiXhosa is ukumangaliswa, meaning can we still be struck with a sense of awe and wonder, or again ambushed by hope? I want to end that answer honestly. The people watching this evening from different parts of the world, some of them in places where hope is not a lecture topic, but a daily survival decision, deserve more than comfortable reassurance from this beautiful church building in Amsterdam. So let me begin not with hope, but with the world as it actually is, or as I see it. We face what I have called a kairos moment for humanity. Kairos in Greek does not mean ordinary time. It means the appointed time, the moment of crisis and opportunity that cannot be postponed. And the crisis I am describing is this: economic inequality is metastasizing across the world like a cancer. Over 100 million people are currently displaced from their homes, the largest forced migration since the Second World War. The Uppsala Conflict Data Program in Sweden recorded 61 active conflicts involving at least one state in 2024, the highest number since statistics were first collected in 1946. The climate crisis is bearing down most heavily on communities that contributed least to causing it. And the political response across the world, or much of the world, has not been to face this honestly, but to find someone to blame. Across both the economically developed and underdeveloped world, we are watching the rise of what I call the left behinds. People standing on the margins, watching elites prosper while their own standard of living is eroded. These victims of the current systems of global financial governance are responding to their situation by turning towards populist politics, embracing economic chauvinism, xenophobic nationalism, resurgent racism, and the stirrings of a new kind of fascism. And in an age-old pattern, the elites, through their dominance of media and public debate, are exploiting the disillusionment of the left behinds by cultivating division, by diverting people's anger away from those responsible for the inequality, by blaming the vulnerable, the poor, and the weak, those even less fortunate than themselves, for their plight. Like a cancer, inequality eats away at our social compacts, threatening to devour everything that makes us human. I say this not as an observer from a distance. I have consoled mothers and sisters in Ukraine and prayed at mass graves while sirens wailed overhead. I have sat with despairing peace mediators, freshly returned from South Sudan, and attended a memorial service of fellow South Africans killed in the DRC peacekeeping mission. I have walked the corridors of the United Nations and the rooms of Davos and found in both places the same exhaustion. People who know the scale of what is broken and have run out of the language to say so. I've walked with communities that have no sanitation, no voice, no expectation that the powerful will look their way. And I've stood on the floor of the London Stock Exchange and in the corridors of financial power and found there a kind of moral vacuum, a disconnection between the decisions being made and the lives being shaped by them. Earlier this week, I was in the southeast of Amsterdam, in Belmar. I'm glad I see some from the library here, where I learned that although Amsterdam is one of the wealthiest cities in one of the wealthiest nations in history, you can still see the same logic at work in its streets and in its policies, that some lives count more than others. As I have said, we face a Kairos moment. It is real. It is now. And into it, tonight, we launch a book called Voices of Hope. Before we go further, we need to be precise about what kind of hope are we speaking of. Because there is a hope that is merely the absence of despair, thin, nervous, easily shattered. And there is a hope that is something altogether more durable. I want to speak about the second kind. Last year in Rome, at a symposium on hope jointly hosted by Freie Universiteit, the University of the Free State, and the Anglican Church of Southern Africa, I drew on the work of the theologian Jürgen Moltmann, whose Theology of Hope, written in 1964, remains one of the most searching theological texts of the 20th century. The South African scholar, Professor Jacobs Forster, argues that Moltmann's framework offers not sentimental hope, but what he calls tangible hope, grounded not in single liberation events, but in the ongoing movement of the Spirit of the living God in history. Moltmann's thesis, as Forster reads it, is that hope does not lie primarily in historic moments. Not in 1994 in South Africa, not in any single triumph. The people of Israel had many liberations, for example, the Exodus, the return from Babylon, and hope rooted in those events soon faded. Consistent hope on this account is found in the movement of God's reign, flowing from the resurrection of Christ, manifesting in signs where good is victorious over evil, peace over enmity, love over hatred. These signs are God's continuously grinding out of the hard rock of evil the visible, touchable signs of goodness. I find that image extraordinary, and I want to dwell on it. The hard rock of evil, the grinding, the slow, costly material production of something good out of something terrible. This is not hope as a feeling that arrives when conditions improve. It is hope as a practice, a refusal to be daunted, an intensification of effort precisely in the face of the challenge, a willingness to act as instruments of the moving God even when the large picture is dark. We are warned on this reading against placing all our hope in single episodes or single persons. And this brings me to the South African story, which is often told as a reason for hope in the world, and to what it does and to what it does not prove. For the most of the second half of the 20th century, it looked as though South Africa was headed for a racial war. We avoided it through largely peaceful struggle, through international sanctions, through exemplary leadership of Nelson Mandela and the last white president, F.W. de Klerk. Mandela was what I would call a symbol of holiness, a leader set apart, able to hold himself and others accountable to a greater being, and to draw people together based on a vision for the common good. Our Truth and Reconciliation Commission, chaired by my predecessor, Bud One, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, was praised across the world as something genuinely new in the life of nations. Amnesty in exchange for truth, healing in the place of retribution. I prayed with Mandela. I wrote a book on it, Faith and Courage, Praying with Nelson Mandela. I also prayed with F.W. de Klerk. I spoke at his funeral and was present at his cremation. Whatever history's contested account of F.W. de Klerk's legacy, his final recorded message was this: I, without qualification, apologize for the pain and the hurt and the indignity and the damage that apartheid has done to Black, Brown, and Indian South Africa. He said it as if he had a conversion, that he realized in his heart of hearts that apartheid was wrong. Even in the most unlikely of people, the grinding of goodness out of hard rock continues. But I want to be honest about what South African story does not prove. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission is, as Jesus said of himself in Nazareth, a prophet without honor in his own country. Our government has never acted on some of the key recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Victims of gross violation of human rights have been sold short, and it was never mandated to deliver economic justice. That is a task in the hands of government and the private sector, which have both failed to implement redistributive measures, making us the most unequal society in the world. So while our forebears fought a struggle against colonialism and apartheid, bringing us out of the wilderness and into a non-racial democracy, we have not built the land which that democracy promised us. This is why I have been calling for over a decade for what I name the new struggle. A struggle to eradicate corruption, to regain our moral compass, to bring about economic justice, and to realize the promises of our Constitution. This struggle cannot be for a few multiracial middle class to simply inherit the privileges of the old elite. The struggle must be for a new society, more equal, more honest, one in which the wealth that comes from growth is shared equitably among all, and in which equality of opportunity is real rather than rhetorical. And those of us with financial means must be prepared to make sacrifices to redistribute what God has given us for the benefit of the poorest of the poor. In response to this crisis, which, as I have said, affects the global North as well as the global South, I'm urging the adoption of a theology and ecclesiology of generosity, focusing on the incarnation as a humanitical key to both theology and economy. If God, for example, chose the margins of society in which to demonstrate God's presence in our world, if the divine entered the world as a refugee child in poverty in a borrowed room, then the church that follows God must orient itself towards the margins too, not as a matter of charity, but as one of justice, not out of occasional generosity, but as a demonstration of structural commitment. And I want to add what I have been saying recently in Geneva and in New York. We must address not only material poverty, but spiritual poverty. It is the spiritually poor in the developed world and many among wealthy elites in the global south who generate the blindness that ignores the desperate suffering of the people of Gaza, of Sudan, of Ukraine, and the 61 other places of conflict in the world today. The ecological crisis belongs to this same frame. The communities of the Sahel, of coastal Bangladesh, of the Pacific Islands did not cause 2 centuries of carbon accumulation. They are bearing its first and heaviest costs. This too is a justice question. This too belongs to the new struggle. Let me now name 3 practices, not programs, not policies, but spiritual and civic disciplines that I believe are equal to the Kairos. The first is Indaba. This is a isiZulu and isiXhosa concept, a gathered community discerning together, every voice carrying weight, the purpose being not majority decision, but shared wisdom. It entered the global Anglican life at the 2008 Lambeth Conference as a way through profound disagreement. Its theological root is ancient. It mirrors the silence of the Jerusalem Council in Acts 15, sitting with what had been heard before it reached its conclusion. In a world designed to hear only the powerful, Indaba insists that the woman excluded from the peace table in South Sudan knows something about peace than the men who sit around it. That the undocumented person in Amsterdam knows something about belonging than the policy document. That practicing Indaba is in itself an act of hope. The second is courageous conversations. I have called the church throughout my ministry to conversations it would rather not have about the gap between what we preach and what we practice, about what the young people we are failing, about the inequality we have normalized. The conversations are not performances of moral superiority. They are acts of love towards a community you refuse to give up on. In the Christian Bible, Amos named the exploitation of the merchants of Samaria with a precision that made comfortable religion impossible. Desmond Tutu called out apartheid as an evil policy, evil in and of its very nature. But he simultaneously insisted that its perpetrators were redeemable. That combination of unflinching honesty and unmistakable love is the hardest thing in public life, but it is also the most transformative. The third practice I want to highlight is a theology of generosity, the ecclesiology I've been developing from the incarnation outward. If the God we follow entered the world at the margins, then our institutions, our budgets, our policies, and our prayers must orient themselves thereto. This means challenging structural causes of inequality, not merely ameliorating their symptoms. It means being prepared, as Pope Francis insists, to reject the absolute autonomy of markets when those markets produce suffering, and to attack the structural causes of inequality. It means the church acting not as a commentator of injustice, but as a participant in its dismantling. Tonight, we present 30 voices, 30 people from different continents, disciplines, generations, and religious traditions, asked to speak about hope in troubled times. The polyphony of this book is itself part of its argument. A single authoritative voice on hope will be a kind of contradiction, because hope that belongs only to the powerful, only to the credentiated, only to those who have not been broken by what the world has done to them, is not hope in any sense that the suffering can use. These 30 voices are, in Foster's language, signs of the moving God, each one grinding something good out of hard rock, each one a small step taken in hope. Already the range of these voices tell us something. Hope migrates, it cross-pollinates, it appears where it is not expected, in a government ministry and dialogue on global citizenship, on peace with justice at VU, in a mosque at Belma, and a churchyard in Ukraine, in a stadium in Soweto, or a soccer stadium watching a match in joy and anxiety, and a round table of young city makers who refuse to accept the world as it is. So let me return to our question. Can we be surprised by hope again? I want to answer that question now, not with optimism, but with a testimony of what I have seen. I have been in rooms far darker than this one, where hope arrived anyway, not announced, not argued into existence, just present. The way Moltmann describes it, the living, moving God, grinding goodness out of hard rock. A woman in Ukraine who had lost everything and was somehow not destroyed. A peace mediator who came back the next day. An apartheid president who spoke words of apology into a camera, knowing they would be his final words to the world. A woman from South Sudan addressing the student at VU, talking about daring to hope and the courage to knock and open the doors shut by male comrades. Young people in Belma this week who looked at the broken city and refuse to accept that it will not be made whole. These are not proofs, they are signs. And signs, as Moltmann reminds us, are exactly what hope is made of. Not certainty, but the visible, touchable evidence that the moving God has not finished with us, has not finished with his world. As I've said in South Africa, as well as in faith and courage, praying with Mandela, and as I want to say here tonight in Amsterdam, hope is not a nebulous pie in the sky concept. It is the driving force that motivates our determination to name our problems, to identify solutions, and to mobilize people to overcome them. Hope must be what drives us to fulfill the promise of societies based on democratic values, social justice, and fundamental human rights. It is small steps taken in hope, and they become islands of hope. And as those islands come together, we can create landscapes of hope. This is what this book is: 30 islands, one landscape, beginning. Faith sees further, justice reaches further still. So welcome to the Voices of Hope. May they surprise you. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Archbishop Thabo, on your beautiful lecture on Signs of Hope. And although you left your watch at home, you're perfectly on time, so well done. We want now take a pause to reflect on the lecture of the Archbishop, and for that I want to invite my colleague, Marius Lau, to say a few words and to introduce the music.
So, kia lebocha, Tate Archbishop. If you are like me, then there are a lot to think about at the moment, and perhaps the best way to let it sink in for a bit is to listen to a piece of music that will be played by Giles Francis from Bach's cello suite in G, to really just breathe a bit and sink into these benches, in these pews, and let these words just flood over you while you sit in this space for a moment. Giles, thank you for helping us out in creating that moment.
Thank you very much, Giles, for this moment of music, a moment of reflection, which brings us to the second part of this evening. We'll have now two reflections in conversation with the public lecture of Archbishop Thabo Makgoba. The first reflection will be given by Trine de Palm and the second one by Christian Rebergen. Before I go to the first reflection, let me add a few words, because on the initial program there was Eva Kieno Abel. And Eva is a colleague and a PhD candidate at Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam. However, this Monday we received the message that she's ill and that she can't join this evening. Eva, or Keni, to use your African name, we know that you're watching, so also from us we wish you a good and a speedy recovery. And at the same time we are very grateful that Trine Palm was willing to accept our late invitation to reflect on a public lecture of the Archbishop. Thank you very much, Trineke. You are director of the Scientific Institute of the Dutch political party ChristenUnie. and you obtained your PhD in political science at Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam. And you're also one of the contributors to Voices of Hope. And later on you can see which voice she wrote about. Today you will go in conversation with another voice, also in the book, Archbishop Thabo, and reflect from your own background on his public lecture. May I invite you, Trineke, to come forward and share your reflection with us.
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to reflect on this wonderful lecture, A Voice of Hope. The whole endeavor also of contributing to this publication was also a bit of a challenge, working in a political environment which is perhaps more characterized by anger and anxiety than by hope, and where there are often decisions made in a disconnect with those affected. You can get quite cynical quite easily. But this endeavor has also been then a welcome surprise for me. I will immediately already sell the name of the author I wrote on, so it's not going to be a surprise later on. I wrote a chapter on Reinhold Niebuhr together with Andries Bouwman. He's a mayor in the north of the Netherlands. And I don't know how well you know Reinhold Niebuhr, but hopeful is not the first adjective that comes to mind when reading Niebuhr's work, with his emphasis on human sinfulness, lust for power, and broken structures. And speaking for myself, hopeful is also definitely not the first thing that people would mention to describe me. I have a background in studying the politics of military intervention, the hard rock of evil, you could say, and in a political environment where it's primarily about power. And with my personal setup, I'm really better equipped at imagining what can go wrong than seeing the good things in life. So Niebuhr's Voice of Hope appealed to me immediately. In his vision, hope is rooted in grace. It helps us to deal with the impermanence and imperfection of the world we live in, to persevere in doing good, because we are able to envisage a world beyond our lifetime. So it broadens and enlarges our time horizon of expectation. And as Niebuhr puts it, as such, hope is not so much the opposite of pessimism, but its sublation. So it won't come as a surprise to you now that I really appreciated that Archbishop Makgoba started his talk with the world as it is, to call the hard rocks of evil for what they are. And in my world, most geopolitical analysis leave it at that. And that's where hope comes in, as you in your talk so eloquently showed. For me, I'd like to highlight 3 lessons I learned from your talk. And the first one I think is quite similar to Niebuhr, in that you explicitly found the foundation of hope in faith. Hope as the movement of God's reign flowing from the resurrection of Christ. And I think that it underscores that in the end, it is not up to us, it's not on our shoulders, and that is also freeing in so many ways. The second lesson I learned is that we should look at different places for signs of hope, not in the historic moments, not in the single triumphs, but in these visible and touchable signs of goodness. And I think that there also this perspective, even of particularly in the hard places, we need this perspective of hope, because we may otherwise turn blind for those windows of opportunities that will present itself time and time again to change the courses of conflict and inequality. So with Niebuhr in mind, peace on earth, it may not yet be permanent, it may not yet be everywhere, but always it will emerge again. Peace and justice will embrace again. The first lesson is that hope is about the willingness to act as instruments of the moving God, even or perhaps especially when the large picture is dark. And it brought me to think of a Bible verse in one of the letters by Peter, where it says, "Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have." And that's really a lesson I try to keep in mind myself as well, especially in politics, but I think also in church life. It's often about winning the argument. And if you can turn the conversation to talk from heart to heart about the hope that is in you, often there is a lot of, you got into a completely different world. And I think that's also the awesome thing with this publication, that it presents these voices of hope as signs of the moving God that has not been finished with this world. And I think it's great if this publication serves as an encouragement for us all to find our own voice of hope, and also to prepare us by reading the voices of others to articulate this whenever we are called upon. And the way we do this may be different for all of us. And for this, I'd like to end with the work of Bob Goudswaard, who, for the Dutch people among us, know him. He has been for a long time. He was a professor at the Vrije Universiteit. And in 2007, he published a book, Hope in Troubled Times. So 20 years ago, they also thought that they lived in troubled times. So puts things in perspective. And he says, well, there are 3 directions, basically, for hope, and which may help us to develop our own voice of hope. The first one is hope as a periscope. So it helps us to broaden our scope, to look for new voices, new ideas, and new solutions. The second one is that hope is a minesweeper. Well, in political minefields, but elsewhere. So not responding just to symptoms, but really looking for the causes of conflict. And the last one, which is perhaps the most difficult, at least definitely if you try to envision how that looks like, is the rope ladder. Well, if I'm going to the gym, then this is definitely one of the most difficult ones, using your both hands and feet, small movements, step by step. And that's also, according to Goudswaard, what hope is about. So that may look differently for all of us, but let's look for voices of hope, new voices of hope, that sublate evil as real minesweepers and persist in the small moments of change, of doing good. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trineke, for opening up the lecture of Archbishop Thabo and including your own voice from your own background. And now we want to open up the conversation further with Christian Trebergen. And Christian is the Secretary General of the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And he studied general economics at Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam. Christian, may I invite you to come forward for the second reflection.
Well, good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you, Archbishop Thabo and Trineke Palm, for your inspiring words. And well, your lecture, Archbishop, is really important and timely to one of the defining questions of our age: how societies can sustain hope in a period of fragmentation, of insecurity, of declining trust, although 20 years ago I just learned it was already not very positive. But it's not only the right time, it's also the right place, because, it was already said, we are here in the Anglican Reformed Church and in Amsterdam, and every Sunday morning there's well, home to a very diverse congregation, bringing together people from all over the world. And in the evenings, this church hosts an informal, accessible, and I would say non-denominational gatherings. And it's called in Dutch diensten met belangstellenden, services for those who are interested. And actually, years ago, when I lived in Amsterdam, I used to go here with my wife, and we attended the services in this place. So for me, it's honestly good to be back 30 years ago, and I cherish the moments in this church and the discussions and conversations I had. And I think what brought all the people here were actually a search for stories of hope, and not really their background or the specific conviction. And well, it's extra special because I was also married in this church, and I hadn't been back for 30 years, so it's special. My daughter was baptized, and well, I really feel honored to be back here in this church, organized by an event by my old university. So very special here tonight. And well, for us, this church was, as I said, a place of reflection, conversation, and inspiration, and a place to find hope. Yet the world looked quite different 30 years ago, and the Iron Curtain had just fallen. We moved from a bipolar world, the US and the Soviet Union, to one in which the Western world dominated the international system. And the rules provided, in a way, a certain sense of justice, some form of stability, and at least predictability, at least in most parts of the world. And how different does the world look today? Speaking from my current position at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, well, look to the developments taking place around the world. It does not give you a lot of optimism, it doesn't give you a lot of hope. We're witnessing the erosion of a multilateral system, a moment where, actually at the moment when international collaboration is more necessary than ever. We see global inequality rising, despite the ambitions we've set ourselves through the so-called Sustainable Development Goals. And in many parts of the world, the fundamental rights and freedoms are under increasing pressure. So even as a diplomat, there are moments when we feel discouraged. And also we feel sometimes discouraged because our own political climate in the Netherlands. And well, as Trineke said, focusing on very short-term issues. Short-term terms of cabinets do not help to solve the issues actually were necessary to be solved. And as civil servants, we feel a huge responsibility that we have to try to keep up the hope. We have to try to keep up long-term vision, how we can make this country a better place. And not really because we see something happening, but as an act of will, as a driving force, as a practice. It's not a sentiment, as you said, Archbishop, for reserved for times when events are encouraging, but they're more relevant for challenging times. So let me share one inspiring example, what it can look like in practice. Because recently I was in Costa Rica. I had the privilege to present the so-called Medal of Merit of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to Mr. Oscar Perez. He's a Salvadorian priest, journalist, and human rights defender, actually, who represented the families of the 4 Dutch journalists who were killed in 1982. And Mr. Perez and his organization played a key role since then to bring justice. And finally, by filing a complaint in 2018, it led to the historic 2025 convictions of 3 former military commanders for their murders. Because of this perseverance, justice was served after 43 years. 43 years. And that is really, I would say, embodiment of hope. And within the ministry, we try to support human rights defenders like Mr. Perez. And not only when they are involved in a Dutch case, because we believe it matters on the national and on the international level. And that conviction has long guided the Dutch foreign policy. And it's why the Netherlands took a firm stand against apartheid in South Africa, particularly from the 70s and 80s onwards. And why we supported the work of your predecessor, Bishop Desmond Tutu. And for decades, the Dutch foreign policy and international cooperation have been rooted in the belief that security, prosperity, and justice are deeply interconnected. They reinforce each other. When the one is weakened, the others are weakened as well. There can be no stable and prosperous world as long as justice stumbled in the streets, to borrow a biblical phrase. And it is from this conviction that the Netherlands is also proud to host the many international institutions like the International Criminal Court of Justice and the International Court of Justice, and the International Criminal Court, both in The Hague, and both under severe international pressure. And it's also from this conviction that we remain committed to strengthen the framework of our international institutions like the UN and the Human Rights Council. They're not perfect, not at all. But we have to support them because they provide at least a framework for justice, dialogue, stability, and peaceful coexistence. They curb the law of the strongest and give a voice to minorities and individual citizens. And all our efforts to promote the work of these institutions are, to me, in a way, hope as a practice, as you describe it. Sure. There's also a matter of self-interest to support these institutions, and that's why foreign policy is also about. They're vital for a relatively small country like the Netherlands. And we, as the ministry, of course, we have to serve the interests of the Dutch people. That means ensuring security at a time when the war has returned to our continent, because one country simply invades another one. And it also means protecting and strengthening our economic situation at a time we are losing our competitiveness. But ultimately, we pursue also our interest to protect our values. If we protect our values, our way of life, our freedoms, our rule of law within an international framework. Because without that higher purpose, all our efforts for security and welfare will sooner or later degenerate into a pursuit in which the weak are forgotten. And in that case, all our efforts will, in fact, be hopeless. So, I want to also underline, Archbishop Thabo, the fact what you said about that across many societies, including in Europe, there are groups actually who experience globalization, technological change, political transformations, not just as progress, but as a loss. Those left behind, loss of security, of recognition, of belonging. And that, when these experiences are ignored, trust in the institutions begin to erode. And within the ministry, we have a severe obligation to strive for a world where actually the opposite is true. Whether it's in grand conference halls of international diplomacy or through smaller efforts that rarely make the headlines. Yet hope is not only found in major breakthroughs, it was already said by both of you. It's reflected in small practical steps that make a tangible difference in people's life. So it goes from trying to assist these nearly impossible negotiations on a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine, to small support to citizens in the southeastern part of Ukraine, to help them get through the winter. From high-level diplomatic summits to small projects to strengthen local communities. And it's not only done by governments. I mean, there are many other partners, businesses, communities, grassroots initiatives. And you mentioned already South Sudan. I think about the role of the church there to at least be some form of hope to reconciliation in a war-torn country. I think about a dialogue which I have with communities in The Hague, religious organizations who actually try to fight the toxic voices in our society who actually want to increase polarization instead of bringing people together. So I think that's probably the essence of hope in our work. Continuing to believe that both major and seemingly modest steps matter, both. And in places like this, the Anglican Church here in Amsterdam can help us to keep believing that. As an act of will, and inspired by books like The Voices of Hope and gatherings like this. So thank you all for being here. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Christian, for adding your voice of hope to the conversation. And you see that we are broadening and including more and more voices into the conversation. Before I invite all of you to conversation in the reception hall, there's a last element we want to do here in this church hall. And that is launching officially the publication Voices of Hope. And I see that some pictures are made, so let me keep the book for a moment. In a moment, each one of you will get a book, so no worries. And the journey of Voices of Hope started with the symposium. Archbishop Thabo referred already to it. Rediscover and build hope for all. It was Rome in June last year. And the symposium was part of the Pilgrims of Hope, initiated by Pope Francis and continued by Pope Leo. And the symposium was also part of the Power of Hope, the academic theme of the year at Vrije Universiteit last year. And in coming together, the Jubilee of the Pope, the academic theme of the Vrije Universiteit, Archbishop Thabo from South Africa, University of Free State in South Africa. In preparation, we started to develop Voices of Hope. From different continents, from different disciplines, from different generations, and from different philosophical and religious traditions. And for now, it has resulted in this book, with contributions of many colleagues, and we as editors brought them together. And the editors are Mark van Vuren, Julieta Matos Castaño, and Erik Borgman. And I will promise you, this book is not the end. Just a moment of celebration along our way. And may I invite Erik, Julieta, and Mark to come forward. And they will hand over the first copies of Voice of Hope to the speakers of tonight. So may I also invite the speakers of tonight to come forward. And now I have to do my logistics. Exactly. So in handing over the first copies of Voices of Hope, And by handing over flowers, we want to thank Christian, Trineke and Archbishop Thabo for their contributions this evening, for opening up the conversation that we can continue later on in the reception hall. And each of my colleagues will say a few words to one person and then handing over the copy. So please, Julieta.
So my copy is for Christian, and I would like Christian to thank you for your words, and please receive this copy of Voices of Hope. As Emily Dickinson wrote, hope is the thing with feathers, and here you will find many of them. May they inspire you to add your own.
It's really interesting. We must be saved by hope. Why? Because nothing that is worth doing can be achieved in our single lifetime. It's a visionary quote from the chapter on Reinhard Niebuhr that you co-wrote, and thank you for reminding us of this long-term vision, and I gratefully hand you this first copy too.
It's always strange that our Creator has only given us two hands, but especially in moments like this. So the honor for me is to thank Bishop Thabo, not only for his beautiful lecture, because that is already done, not only because he's in the book, he's the only one who is in the book as a subject, and you now probably know why, because he is a voice of hope, but also because I think he gave us a new definition of hope tonight. The slow grinding of something good out of something evil. I think this is probably the most beautiful way of voicing what hope really is. And I thank you if only for that. I thank you and for everything else that you did. And again, showing us that all these issues on hope, which we sometimes tend to think about as something that is naive or something that we cannot do anymore, that they are still the most important thing in the world.
You're thanked already, so I won't do it again. It has been a precious gathering till so far. Let's open up the conversation further. What we will do now is that first the speakers and editors will leave the church hall. We will gather there our stuff, and from there walk to the old Lutheran Church just across the road at Spui. We are here at Begijnenhof. There are people, there are women who are living here. It's their private space, so please leave this Begijnhof in silence, and once we're through the door, you can speak, and we can open up the conversation. I'm looking at my colleagues. I think everything is set for the moment. Let's me thank you all for being here. We will come back to you because this evening has been recorded, but also other elements of Archbishop Thabo's sabbatical has been recorded. And let's continue the conversation now at the old Lutheran Church. So let me give the good example and close the part here, and let's move to the old Lutheran Church. Thank you very much.
One more thing. I think we have to thank John Jarry. Let's put a round of applause for him.
And while we move, Giles will play another piece on his violin. Giles, thank you very much.